price adjustments have finally happened. Material price adjustments anyway. G'day folks, my name is Rob, welcome back to another F1 Fantasy video. Today we are looking at a huge development in the F1 Fantasy game. Since the Canadian Grand Prix concluded, there have been a raft of material price adjustments to drivers and constructors throughout the game. So I want to take a look at what's happened, what drivers have gone up and down in price, what this means for the game going forward, and then how this affects the template alternative options, and then the future of price adjustments moving forward. So if you haven't done so already, please do subscribe to the channel. If you're new around here, like the video, comment below, all that good stuff. Really appreciate it as always. So for those of you who were paying close attention to the game not long after the Canadian Grand Prix concluded, we saw some pretty hefty price changes to all of the majority of the assets in the game. Being in the United States, I was able to see this before going to bed. I think the majority of my European friends in the F1 fantasy community were probably asleep when the news broke. So just want to dissect this and get some content into your feed to just give you a download of what's happened. So I guess in the lead up to this weekend, for the last kind of 8 or 9 weeks, race weeks, we've seen price changes come through for a lot of the drivers that have performed quite well, but there have been only incremental changes of 0.1, 0.2, maybe 0.3 million, even for the most high performing assets in Verstappen, Alonso, and the Red Bull and Aston Martin constructor. That just really hasn't moved the needle at all, and as a result of that, there's been a lot of concern among the F1 fantasy community in general around the pricing structure and how that F1 got it so wrong after pre-season testing. Fernando Alonso, the Aston Martin constructor, as I mentioned, Max Verstappen, Red Bull, and even Sergio Perez, and to a degree, say Lance Stroll as well, were all criminally underpriced, and we saw the likes of the Mercedes and Ferrari assets probably a little overpriced given how far they were off the pace of the Red Bull. So as a result of that, it hasn't really made that interesting of a game to kick the season off, but we're now through 8 or 9 races, and finally, I'm not sure what's prompted it from behind the scenes, but we've finally seen some material adjustments that have made, I guess, the game a little bit more interesting, and this could potentially shake up the template moving forward. So I'm not going to try and speculate what that means for the template right now. We've got 2 weeks between now and the next race in Austria, so plenty of time to think about what this means for our teams. But in essence, I think it's obviously a very good sign that we're seeing some hefty changes for drivers like Fernando Alonso and Aston Martin, just because of how criminally underpriced they were from what we saw in pre-season and from what we've seen throughout the first 9 or so races this year. So I want to go through each of the price changes for the drivers and the constructors that we have seen. I'll provide, I guess, 2 cents on a few of them. And obviously, please feel free to engage in the comments below and on Twitter if you have your own kind of thoughts on the matter and what this means for the game going forward. So I thought we'll go quickly to this tweet I put out not long ago. Just wanted to take a look at or get down all of the major changes in the game. There have also been a number of drivers and constructors that have not changed, but these are the ones I put out on my Twitter if you want to take a look in terms of the value changes. But as I said, not all of them have changed. So we'll go quickly back to the game here. I'm just sorting the drivers by their current value. Max Verstappen up 0.2 million. I think that's good, but I still think all of the Red Bull assets are criminally underpriced. I wonder if these minor increases are going to ultimately move towards a price that is truly reflective of each of these 3 assets on the left-hand side of your screen. I don't think any of these 3 right now are fair values for these assets, but again, if we're seeing 0.3, 0.4, whatever it might be every week, then hopefully by the mid-season point we will see a more accurate value for these guys. Hamilton up 0.3. Not quite sure if these guys, him and Leclerc, having gone up 0.3 each, is fair. I mean, they should probably be benchmarked to Max, and I think being only 3 or 6 million respectively less than Max is probably not fair. Again, we might see Max fly up, but if you own him and you're riding those price rises, it probably doesn't matter too much. Perez up 0.3. I think, again, he's going to have to move closer towards that kind of $20, $21, $22 million mark to be a fair value. Russell down 0.5. He was the only driver that dropped at all in price. I think realistically, even though he has been quite consistent throughout the season, does need to be less than Sergio Perez. And I think provides, as a result of his price now being lower than Perez, a great alternative to the Red Bull driver. Again, I'm not sure, given we'll get to a few other drivers that have seen quite material adjustments, whether this price swing has been based off just 1 week's worth of results, because we have seen a couple of drivers fly up in value much higher than I probably expected. And Russell's just coming off a DNF in Canada. So whether or not that's purely attributed to the result in Canada or just to be below Perez is yet to be seen. Sainz up again 0.3. I mean, I'm not too concerned. I think 17.5 is probably fair for him. But again, these guys need to be benchmarked to the Red Bulls, and being that they're so much lower probably makes a lot more sense. Nothing for Norris. Fernando Alonso up 1 million, probably should have gone up 2 or 3 in my opinion, but again, might well just progressively increase week on week. Ocon up 0.5, as is the case with Gasly as well. I think the Alpines are clearly the 5th best car on the grid. However, with that Gasly increase, creates some problems for people with lower budget if you try to switch out Stroll and you're then stuck with the Hülkenberg Sargent. I'm not going to get into team selection scenarios too much here, but again, some food for thought. Stroll up 0.5. I think, again, he probably needs to be priced closer to the 9, 10, even maybe $11 million mark. Probably even higher than Lando Norris, just because of how strong that Aston Martin is, despite the fact Stroll hasn't really put in any performances representative of a driver that's in such a competitive car. Bottas increased by 0.5. This one was a bit confusing, to be honest. He did have a really good first race in Bahrain, but quite frankly has stunk up the joint since that time. If we just look at some of his scores since Bahrain's 13-point haul, a -2, a 12, a -1, a 2, and a 10, and another 2 and 6. I'm not suggesting these are bad scores. I don't think he's actually DNF'd this season either. But to be honest, these are the kind of scores you get from a budget driver priced at 4 or 5 million, not I guess a midfield team driver at almost 8 million. I honestly think he should probably be priced closer to 7, 6.5 based on what we've seen from him, and Joe has outperformed him more often than not so far this season. So a little bit baffled by that. Again, Bottas isn't really featuring in the template at the moment, so doesn't really concern me too much, but it is a bit bizarre that he's gone up even though he's had a pretty poor start to the season. Piastri, no change. Magnussen, no change. Albon up 1 million. Don't get me wrong, had an incredible performance in Canada. His best driver of the season by a long shot. Served up more of those points for Williams that Sargent obviously hasn't been able to support. I think part of this has to obviously do with his recent performance in Canada, because before this race he was averaging negative points. He's at 9 points for the season and had 22, so that would mean he was on negative 13 before we got to Canada. Not really helped by 2 DNFs in Saudi Arabia and Australia. His best performance was obviously like Bottas that first race of the season, but hasn't really had anything more than 5 since that time. So a little surprise again. I don't think 5.9 is an unfair price, probably a little on the high side, but again doesn't really allow a lot of us to choose Albon, much like Tsunoda again, if you're stuck in a similar situation with the cost cap with me. So yeah, just something to think about. But given his recent performance, I would hazard a guess a lot of that increase has to do with Canada. So Tsunoda up 0.5. I think he's been really consistent this season. I am kind of a bit bummed that I didn't end up going with him. He outdrove Joe on the weekend, and so probably has been rewarded with a little bit of an increase as a result of that. He had 8 points. He had 11 the previous week. yeah, he's had some really good performances for someone at that $5 million mark. So great start to the season for Sonoda. No change to Joe. Very surprised by that. He's been probably the standout budget driver through 8 or 9 races this season, even though he didn't really provide a great haul of points. But again, he is the overtake merchant for a reason, and at 16% owned still is a very good differential. So a bit surprised. He should probably be close to Sonoda. I'm not saying 5.1, but I think 4.95 would probably be a fair price for him. No change to these 3 guys at the bottom, and probably unsurprising given they all haven't really inspired so far. And then as the constructors, Red Bull up 0.2, should probably be a little bit higher. Mercedes, no change, probably should be a little bit lower. Ferrari, I'm not sure why they're increasing, should also be a little bit lower. And I think part of that has to do with the fact that Red Bull is so highly owned, is so dominant. You need to give the players a reason to go with another option. If it's just going to be too easy of a choice when you're only a few $1 million separating Red Bull and then these 2 guys down here. So I think Red Bull needed to either go up more, or Ferrari and Mercedes need to go down a few million each, because it's just not really viable for anyone to choose either of these 2 if you're trying to climb the ranks. Alpine 0.5, sure. I don't think that's make or break, to be honest. McLaren, I'm not sure why they've gone up 0.5. Norris and Piastri haven't really done all that much this season, and looking at some of their scores, they're barely scraping double digits in some of these races. So it's, I don't know, a bit bizarre. Obviously Bahrain as well, not great, 8 points. I'm not sure why McLaren are going up, to be honest. Aston Martin, again, up 1 million, but to be honest, they should probably have gone up 2.5. Again, they're probably trying to stagger it so it's not drastic and a reactionary response. But again, you'd expect Aston Martin to climb above these 2 in the coming weeks. Probably by mid-season, you'd hope that they're closer to 15. So anyway, that's the raft of all price changes so far this season, or at least, for this week in Canada. Again, a great result, I think, for the game. And I guess what this means moving forward, as I've said, probably going to see similar changes for similar amounts for a lot of these underpriced assets. So I guess for me, that makes me feel a little inclined to hold on to the template, just because we're going to see increases in the in the Red Bulls and the Aston Martins, probably in this ballpark for the next few weeks, or at least that's my guess. There's nothing announced from F1 to suggest there's going to be anything happening otherwise. But just because of what we've seen post-Canada, my guess is this is probably going to be the case for the next few weeks. So I would not be surprised if I end up just riding this template through to the mid-season break, and because I'm outpriced for Sonoda, it probably is just going to be Joe. But again, I'll get into some team selection thoughts closer to Austria. We're 2 weeks away, as I mentioned, so plenty of time to think about what we want to do with our teams. But as always, just wanted to get something down and get your thoughts. If you've got any, as I mentioned, please drop them below in the comment section, because obviously your input to me is very highly valued, and there have been some excellent points raised by you guys in the past that I've overlooked. So don't feel afraid to drop something below if you have a different opinion or a point of view that you want to share. But as always, appreciate you guys dropping by. I know it's a very kind of spontaneous post-race video, but did, as I mentioned, want to get something out to you guys to get my 2 cents on the matter. So as I said at the start of the video, please like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. I'll be back with my team selection video probably later this week or first thing next week. And I'll see you guys all very, very soon.